Welcome to the Long Thread podcast about spinning, stitching, and weaving by hand. The podcast is presented by Long Thread Media, publishers of Spin-Off, Handwoven, Piecework, and Little Looms magazines. Find us online at longthreadmedia.com. I'm your host, Long Thread Media co-founder Anne Merrow. We've partnered with the Suri Network to bring you their story and help spread the word about their mission. Join us for a conversation in this sponsored episode. So joining me today are Liz Valkamp of Salt River Alpacas. Hello. And Laurel Shonelin from Bluebird Hills Farm.
Thanks for having me, Anne.
So you folks are here with the Suri Network. And when I was looking up Suri, I have to confess, I did know what I was looking for, but Suri crews featured pretty heavily in the search results. And so you must be pretty accustomed to having to explain to folks what are Suri and what is the Suri Network. Can you fill us in?
Suri Cruise was born after the Suri Network, so that's a little bit more helpful. But the Suri Network is a group of alpaca owners that have the Suri breed, which has a different fleece from the more common Huacaya breed. So both of us have been in the industry for quite a while, and we've both been members as well for quite a while. It focuses on the special characteristics of the Suri to promote and preserve the breed and the products that have been made from it.
So you mentioned the words Suri and Huacaya. What do those words mean?
There are two different hair types, in a sense, kind of like long-haired dachshunds and short-haired dachshunds. The Huacaya breed has a crimped fiber that sticks out perpendicular from the skin, much like sheep's wool, whereas the Suri has long, straight fiber that hangs in locks from the body. So the hair is basically hanging on the sides of the animal. So they appear very different, but conformationally, they're both pretty much the same.
So if I picture an alpaca in my mind, what am I likely to be imagining? Is that a Huacaya or a Suri?
That's a great question. So probably what's going to come to mind first is a Huacaya, and that is simply because there are more of them. And so you're likely to see a Huacaya before you see a Suri. And that is the case both in the United States and globally, including Peru. And that's one of the reasons, actually, that we formed the Suri Network, was just because there is a larger alpaca association that represents both breeds. But just given that Suris were kind of the, minority in the minority, I think the Suri people just felt like we wanted to make sure that we had a voice.
Sure.
Yeah.
And what is it about Suris that sets them apart and makes them special?
Really, I think it is their flowing locks. They're really, So, if you're shearing them every year, you're probably just going to see maybe a 5 to 6 inch growth. Some of the younger animals can go up to maybe 8 inches if you're shearing them every year. Some people will see what we would call show animals. So those are animals that may be left in full fleece for a bit past 12 months. They may go to, say, 18 months or even up to 2 years. And that's when you can really see long flowing locks. And that tends to grab people's eyes.
Boy, long flowing locks, it makes me think of running along a beach or a shampoo commercial. It's just inherently, it just sounds so luxurious.
It is. And it is what grabs people.
Yeah.
It's very luxurious, and one of the outstanding qualities of Suri is the inherent luster. Within that fleece, it has a very shiny surface, and microscopically, that's because of the way the fibers are structured differently than sheep's wool or Huacaya. It also has a very, what we call a cool hand, a silky hand, that also distinguishes it from other natural fibers. Animal fibers, I should say.
8 inches, that is a hugely long fiber.
Yeah, it is. And like I said, usually once you get past, say, well, it depends on when you're shearing. Like a lot of times I have animals that are born in the early fall. And so when shearing comes in the spring, they've maybe just got 5 inches on them. And then that next growth, though, because they're young and they're just really putting out a lot, it's not uncommon for me to get, say, 7 or 7.5 inch, length to them. So there's certain mill machinery out there that can handle that longer fiber. But it's definitely different than Huacaya or sheep's wool. Even the coarser sheep breeds don't typically get that long. And I think Angora goats or mohair, at least in the commercial sector, a lot of times I believe that they shear twice a year. So they can get a really long growth too, but they're shearing twice a year. So they're getting, say, 2 batches of 4-inch as opposed to 1 of 8-inch.
How many of these Suris are there? And I guess I'm probably asking just in North America, but I would imagine that we're not the only folks who have these kinds of alpacas.
I plead ignorance. I'm not sure how many there are. Do you know, Liz?
For some reason in my head, I guess I usually think that there's sort of like a 3 Huacayas to 1 Suri kind of ratio. I'm not going to tell you where I've come up with that. That may be just from our own breed association, thinking about that there's kind of roughly a 3 to 1 ratio. But I would say that is not a fact.
A rule of thumb.
But it does, I do think that it gives you some idea. If anything, that's probably high. So it does give you an idea of their rarity.
So was it the fiber that drew each of you to wanting to work with Suris in the first place? Or was there something else about the animals that really appealed to you?
There's no doubt that the Huacaya is cute and fuzzy. And it wins a lot of hearts at first look. But there's something incredibly regal about a Suri out in a pasture with the sun beaming down on those locks, especially when they start to run and those locks are swaying back and forth, catching the sun with their silky reflection. There's romance there, and there's, as I said, regality. So that's what really caught my eye. That and the fact that they are more rare. You kind of gravitate towards things that are a little bit more special because there aren't as many of them out there.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting for me. I just have a business background. And I think one of the things that I agree with Laurel that I was drawn to their rarity. And I think I looked at it a bit more probably from a business perspective and just felt that there was such an opportunity to create a lane, if you will, for Suri by itself. I kind of knew early on in my research about them, et cetera, that most people, when they think about alpaca, they think about Huacayas. And so it just seemed to me as just kind of maybe an entrepreneurial spirit, it just seemed like a great opportunity to define a fiber that has actually been, Suris have been a domesticated animal for at least 5,000 years.
Wow.
And yet still in this country, certainly, nobody really knows what it is. And I find that fascinating, and I find it a really great business opportunity.
That's interesting. So it's an opportunity, but also something that you're working to fill that gap a bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it came with a niche market in a sense.
And what makes them different is really the fiber. Is that correct? Are there other differences between Suri and Huacaya alpacas, or is it just that they have a different special kind of fiber?
I believe that there are some personality differences, and there's one conformational difference, and that has been noted by veterinarians and people who went to South America at the time of importations. The loin or the backstrap muscle that lies on either side of the spine is actually a little bit thicker, and I think they are stronger in some ways than Huacayas are. So I would say that's one difference. I find that my Suris, while they may be a little bit more prone to being skittish in a sense, they're actually the ones who seem to bond closest with me out in the pasture relative to my Huacayas. It's like once they trust you and are comfortable with you, you have a friend for life. I have one that's like a dog, and she'll follow me around the pasture and is constantly by my side. And I've never really seen that with any of my Huacayas, so it's interesting.
Now, Laurel, you mentioned the word conformation, and I suppose I should mention now you're also a livestock judge. You're an alpaca judge as well. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So everything between the show ring and working with the fiber, you're in for the whole thing.
The whole shebang.
Whole shebang. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, conformation refers to how an animal is put together, whether it's proportioned correctly, whether it's knock-kneed, or all of those elements. That's what we refer to with the term conformation.
Mm-hmm. You said at the time of importation. Can you tell me a little bit about that? How long has it been since Suris were first imported?
I believe the first imports were, 1997, Liz? Is that maybe a little earlier than that, 19...
For the Suris?
For the Suris, maybe 1995.
I think it was earlier because I thought I started in 2004 and the importations were done. I believe there were 6 importations. One of them came through Canada, the last one.
Correct.
But I think they had to have, I think maybe the last one was in 98. I honestly don't know. You got in a little bit before me.
Yeah, there were a couple of importations after 98, but it's early 2000s were the last importations. But when the first ones were, I'm not sure. The first importations were primarily Huacayas. So,
Yes.
And
those
alpacas,
started in the 80s, I think.
right?
Yeah.
85, something along those lines. And those importations were from Peru, Bolivia, and Chile. And those are, of course, the countries that alpacas are native of. But interestingly, the whole camel family, which alpacas are part of, originated in the United States. The first fossil record was found in Kansas. So it's kind of intriguing that they migrated down to South America to form the New World camelids, and the camels went across the Bering Straits to Asia and then Africa. So
It is amazing to think of those as being such close kin.
yeah, they've actually crossed a camel with a llama and had a live animal born, and it was called Kama, which I thought was a great name.
Yeah.
Not sure what you do with it, but
So everybody who's in the Suri Network, everybody who's a breeder has been working on animals that have just been brought into the U.S. in the past, say, 40 years?
that's correct, yes.
Yeah. Well, we see different trends in the fiber arts. What sort of trends have you noticed from the Suri alpaca world over the past few years?
So, I think for growers here in the U.S., we have sort of always focused on a yarn that is not brushed. I think from a trend perspective, just generally speaking, Peru does brush all of their Suri. They do that whether it's a woven product or it's a yarn product, knitting product. And I think that more recently, people have sort of rediscovered in the knitting world, I think people have been rediscovering that brushed Suri. The characteristics and features are going to be the same in terms of luster and drape and that sort of thing, but the look would be different. I think for U.S. growers, I think there is more of a push over the last probably 5 years or so to see the product in woven form. So I think it's something that growers have long wanted here in the U.S. And I feel like in the last 5 years or so, I'm starting to see more people that are dabbling in fabric and weaving with it.
So are you thinking hand weavers or commercial textiles, or what? When you say to see it woven, what do you mean?
I think, so I think definitely I'm seeing more of the growers who do both breeding and fiber arts. I'm seeing more of them working with it in woven form. Maybe that's just me paying attention, but it seems to me that there are more people doing it. On the commercial side, certainly for U.S. growers, it's a little more challenging to put something into a commercial woven product because the fiber is so rare, so we don't have a lot of it. And then to get a really high quality commercial fabric, you want the fiber to be fully worsted. So you want it to run through a mill that has combs. And here in the U.S., there's not much of that. So there's a lot of semi-worsted where you can put it through a pin drafter, but there's not much in the way of actual combs. So it's a little more challenging, but I've done it. But my stuff I sent to Italy. Italy actually has worked with Suri and has worked with Peru for a long time. So Europe tends to be a little bit more familiar, at least with the brush product. So when they got it, they kind of knew a little bit more what to do with it.
But that's a good point, that if they're fairly rare animals and you have to have enough of them to really make something with, even to send them to a mill, it's very special and specialized.
Yes. And you have to, there's sort of that crossover between, from a mini mill to a commercial mill. And it's a pretty big crossover for a number of reasons, but certainly quantity of pounds is one of those hurdles that you have to get over. So I haven't done as much in the last couple of years, but historically I bought fiber from Suri fiber from all over the U.S. to try to accumulate that poundage that you can send off to develop some commercial markets.
Sure.
Well, the other issue is the nature of Suri makes it a little bit more challenging to spin. The scales on the cortex of the fiber are very, very close and tight to that fiber, and they're longer, which means the fibers don't grab onto one another as well as they do with other animal fibers. And that makes it a little bit more difficult to spin. You have to add a little bit more twist. Many mills aren't really, especially the mini mills, aren't as comfortable doing that. So they'll ask if they can blend another animal fiber or some other fibers with it to make spinning a little more predictable and consistent when they go to make the yarn.
Yeah, and then when you get into the commercial side, I think the machinery is such that the mini mills tend to, I guess the way I describe it is they tend to be a little more horizontal. So the slivers come out of the barrel. They don't have to go very far up into the spinning frame. And so there's a greater chance the sliver is going to stay together. On the commercial mills, I think between the speed at which they're going and the distance that the sliver has to travel, a lot of times you need, at any time I've worked with a commercial mill, you need to put something else in there for sure. Something that has a little bit more grab.
Hearing that explanation about the structure of it, it does sound very much like silk. So it makes sense that you said it has a lot of luster and it has a cool hand. Those are all properties that you think of as being related to silk. That kind of makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. There have been studies done about, the differences using electron micrography, looking at the difference between Suri relative to other fibers. And it became really obvious that that was the explanation for many of the traits we saw with our eye and felt with our hands. Now we could quantify and see them by looking at electron micrographs, which was pretty fascinating.
So you mentioned that you're seeing it more in woven fabric lately. Are you also seeing knitting and crochet and other places where people are incorporating Suri into their work?
Absolutely. I've been a participant in a fiber festival for many, many years, way back since, the early 2000s. And at that time, we spent all of our time just talking about what an alpaca was and trying to explain to people what this is alpaca yarn and what's that. Is that related to an emu? Was the most, for some reason, popular question. Oh, you'd be surprised. Do they lay eggs? We still get those questions, but not with the frequency that we did 20 years ago.
Oh, I thought maybe they weren't laying eggs with the frequency that they did 20 years ago.
Yeah, they really slowed down. So many more people are familiar with alpaca, whether it's Huacaya or Suri, and that certainly makes selling the yarn much easier. And of course, if people know more about it, then they're more likely to hear about using it, and their friends are going to tell them how great it is and encourage them to use it as well. So I think it's picked up.
So if you came across a spinner or a knitter who was interested in trying Suri, what would you recommend?
So I think the one thing that I would certainly want to convey to people, and Laurel actually, from an actual spinning perspective or a knitting perspective, Laurel can probably add some flavor to this because she's more familiar with actually doing the spinning. I know kind of the technical components of it, but Laurel's actually the person who's doing it. So the one thing that I try to convey to people is that Suri is different, to not expect to sit down at a wheel or pick up some needles and just start spinning or knitting like they have with their wool products or even with their what we would say alpaca products, meaning Huacaya.
Right.
That Suri is different. It's not bad at all. It's wonderful. And once you get the hang of it, people just absolutely love it. But you definitely have to approach it as a new fiber.
Yeah, I think the expectations should be different. Because of the crimp in Huacaya, which is the same thing that sheep's wool has, that provides some memory, that provides loft to the yarn, and it provides some memory in your garment as well. So when you go to use Suri, you have to understand that this is a very straight fiber. So it's not going to have the memory, and it's going to have some weight to it that causes things to drape more. So when you go to use it, you have to take those qualities into consideration.
And Liz, you actually had some tips for how to successfully knit with Suri. Do I remember that? Different ways that you could knit with Suri that would make it perform just the way you wanted it to?
Yeah, so I think just following on Laurel's comment about Suri is drapey. To me, when people say, well, what is unique about Suri? I say luster and drape. That's what it's going to bring to your garment. So my advice to people oftentimes is to sort of embrace that drape. Don't make it something that it isn't. So if you are selecting the fiber or the yarn for a particular project, make sure that project isn't form-fitting. On vests, for instance, make sure that they are a vest that might drape. They're not going to be something that fits to your midsection. Sweaters, the same thing. That's really going to be the best design decisions for you when you're using the yarn. The other thing, too, is that I think knitters have maybe recently come upon as a trick, if you will, to work with Suri and to make sure that you don't end up with something that's really kind of drags or grows over time. And that is to either select design patterns that knit on a diagonal, anything that basically breaks up that pattern. So instead of just doing a straight stockinette, you might want to have some other type of design in there that kind of breaks that up and allows the yarn or the garment not to grow.
That's interesting. I thought at first you were speaking about, something that's knitted on the bias, which would give it even more drape, but it's so drapey already that you can think about that in terms of the stitch pattern.
Yes, it really is drape. I have a yarn that I make that is actually a 40% wool, 60% Suri.
Sure.
And it's a, kind of a chunky yarn. But even that, even with 40% wool in there, you still get a nice drape to it and nice luster.
Yeah. Do both of you have yarn milled with your fiber?
Liz does it on a much more commercial scale. Most alpaca breeders, including Suri breeders, will have their fleeces. Sometimes they'll just take a singular Suri fleece and send it off and say, this is Buffy's fleece and market it as such. Some of us will take all of our fawns and combine them and do a run. Fortunately, we're coming along as an industry, not just Suri breeders, but alpaca breeders in general. And we're talking about grading and sorting our fiber and making sure we get everything that shouldn't be in the fleece out of the fleece, skirting the fleece, so that the products that we're creating now are much better than what we probably did 15 years ago because we're much more knowledgeable.
One of the characteristics that alpacas are really known for is their wide range of color. Does that carry through for Suris as well as for Huacayas?
It sure does.
It does.
And yeah, it's fun in the pastures to see them polka dotted with various colors. And we certainly, at the alpaca shows, they're actually divided into different color groups to compete. So it's a wonderful aspect of the Suri and the alpaca in general is that not only are they in various colors, but they also do not have lanolin in their fleece, the way sheep's wool does. And that makes it a much more sustainable fiber because it doesn't need the scouring that some other fibers do. So you combine the fact that you can get all these beautiful colors without applying any dye with the fact that it's very easy to clean and take care of. And it's one of the big bonuses of having alpacas.
I'll give a little different spin on Laurel's answer just because I come from it a bit more from a commercial perspective. From a commercial perspective, it can be a little maddening to have all the zillions of colors. Laurel has come and graded for me before, and I am forever trying to throw everything I can into one color group. Just because if you think about it, I'm trying to get quantity, and when somebody is, any farm is sending in 6 different colors, or 10 different colors, because there's different shades of medium brown or different shades of dark brown, etc. And they're sending all that in. And then you get different lengths, staple lengths, and you get different micron grades. You can end up with easily 120 different SKUs. So I'm sort of forever trying to put it together. But the one thing that I would say, and this may take us to sort of a little bit different topic, but actually one of the other characteristics I think about Suri is that it takes a dye beautifully. And while there are definitely people out there who enjoy the natural earthen colors, a lot of times I really feel like something's being left on the table if you're not dyeing it or over dyeing it. Both Laurel and I have had experience with over dyeing on the fawns and even on the browns, and it's a lot of fun, and Suri really does take a dye just so beautifully.
actually, that sort of makes sense with what you were saying earlier about the wonderful property of silk. It's another characteristic that it shares with silk.
Yes. And the overdying is fun. I've had people come into my booth at festivals, and of course, a lot of times artisans really, they're so visual, and the colors on the overdyed yarns will just amaze them because there's just that background to the color that you have. And they're really intrigued, I guess I will say, by the overdying.
It adds a lot of depth to whatever color you're using. Just makes it pop, I guess is the best way of putting it.
So you were speaking about really trying to raise the quality of Suri fiber over the last period of time. Is that related to why you decided to pursue a trademark for Suri Simply Stunning?
Yeah, so the Suri Network really has quite a strong history of education for its members, not only educating the public, but also educating its members on what makes quality fiber. And a lot of that has to do with the breeding of the animal. And we've had a number of programs through the years. And along the way, we felt, in addition to, I think I had mentioned earlier, that certainly my desire, but I think Suri owners in general desire to really give Suri its own lane and define it as its own fiber. And I think between that and all the various education we've done, we felt it was important to actually put together a program that members could use that represents the quality that they have put into their breeding programs and into the products that they sell. And through that, we came up with what started off as, I guess, more of a slogan or a logo, Suri Simply Stunning. And from that, we actually decided to trademark it. And we went through the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and were able to come up with, basically, we used our breed standard and were able to use that breed standard to define what quality is. So those people who sign up are basically become licensees. They pledge to, do their best to adhere to the programs and educational material that we've provided to provide good animal husbandry and to focus on all breeding aspects, so both fiber and conformation, if they are a breeding program. And from that, then they're able to use the Suri Simply Stunning mark. So it's no longer a logo, it's actually a mark. They can use it in their barns if you're coming over for a farm tour and you may see a sign, Suri Simply Stunning. They can use it as hang tags on their products. They can hang signs in their stalls at shows, and they can run ads with that mark on their ad in various publications or on websites, etc. But it is an indication of quality.
And that's the quality of the fiber and also of the animals. Is that right?
Yes. Many of our members are breeders.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those breeders really are just focused on breeding. They're not necessarily focused on making end products. So we wanted to make sure that we had a mark that they could use because they're selling their fiber. And they may be selling their fiber then to somebody who makes Suri products and is a licensee also. They might not necessarily be growers. They may have Suris that are used more just strictly for agritourism and they're not necessarily breeding. So there are elements to the mark that both the breeder can use and that a fiber artist can use.
And so if I as a knitter, spinner, or weaver might see it if I was going to purchase some yarn or some fiber, but then also in my fantasy future life where I have a couple of animals, if we're going to pick up a few Suri alpacas, I might also find the Suri Simply Stunning mark associated with that. Is that right?
Yes, you could ask the breeder that you're purchasing your Suris from. Are you a licensee? If you're going to a fiber festival and you just see yarn, you may see both that Suri Simply Stunning hang tag and then the farm's hang tag that gives information about the yarn itself. And then okay, this person has put sort of that extra care and effort into making this product. And that includes, I think, as Laurel talked about, that would include skirting the fleeces to limit the vegetable matter in there, grading the fiber into the micron levels, making sure that the fiber that you're using is going into an appropriate end product. So if you're buying a rug or if you're buying rug yarn, you're not going to want super fine Suri because it's not going to hold up. You're actually going to want the coarser Suri that is much more sturdy and durable. If you're buying yarn that is to make something that goes around your neck, or you're buying a scarf, a finished product that goes around your neck, probably going to want to know that there's Suri in there that is very fine, because that's going to be touching kind of a sensitive area around on your body.
So it's not just that all of the fiber is fine. It's that the licensees are pledging to make the appropriate match between the fiber and the use?
Yes, exactly. That's one of the things that they should be doing to make sure that you get a product that is, again, quality, that's really going to hold up. And that's going to, if it's something that, say, goes around your neck, that's something that'll feel good on you.
I love that idea, because it's something where you're relying on someone's expertise, not just to say, I want something in this number of microns, or I want it to check these boxes. It's, I'm relying on you and your understanding of this fiber to give me the best result, whatever it is that I'm purchasing.
Yes, absolutely. And so, for instance, if you are a fiber artist that has a garment in mind, for instance, that you want to make, one of the things that you should be able to talk with the farm about is, what is the most appropriate yarn that you, grower or yarn seller, have relative to the garment that I'm making? So outerwear, for instance, tends to be more of a mid-grade fiber. Like I said, something like rugs, some home goods items, those can be coarser because they're going to get a lot of abrasion to them. Again, the really fine stuff going around the neck, maybe some items, that gloves or hats or a sweater that you're not going to wear often, for instance. It's something for a special occasion. Right. That might be something that you use where you really use something that's very fine, because again, it's not going to get a lot of that abrasion.
That is just kind of a remarkable level of versatility that I hadn't really thought of. I think there's often this drive for everything to be fine. And I really love that idea of having something that is high quality at all areas of the range.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, too, to keep in mind is that I don't think we as alpaca owners necessarily, or Suri owners, often don't understand. But one of the interesting things is, if I give somebody some 25, which is a mid-grade, maybe even a little high grade micron Suri fiber, and I let them feel that between their fingers, and then I give them some other animal fiber, not Suri, not even Huacaya, that is 15 micron. Well, that 15 micron should feel amazing, and certainly should feel better than the Suri. But oftentimes it doesn't. And it's because of that scale height and the scale length that Suri has that gives it just an incredible hand. So even though it's a little bit coarser, has stronger, it can still feel absolutely fabulous. And I think that's a quality that we as Suri breeders need to talk about a little bit more, because it is a true advantage that Suri has over some other fibers. And I guess the other thing I would add is that it blends beautifully. And you have to be careful, because if you take that 25 micron Suri and you blend it with 25 micron sheep's wool, that sheep's wool will actually draw the Suri down. It won't enhance things. It won't keep it the same. It'll detract from its hand. So that's something else that folks have to remember. You can look at it and say, okay, well, that's about the same micron. Those should go well together. Not necessarily so.
When you're talking about blending, do you have to try to be careful to match things that are a similar staple length? And I ask that because I don't know very much that has an 8-inch staple length, or is it sometimes cut?
It's definitely an advantage to have the same staple length, but very rarely does it. The things that are most popular to blend with Suri seem to be at the smaller mini mill level. They'll use a lot of merino top, and that usually has a shorter staple length than the Suri. The things that I like to blend with Suri are things that have similar quality: silk, bamboo, tencel. The disadvantages for the bamboo and tencel are that they are plant fibers. So if you're going to dye, you have to keep that in mind, that they may, if they are not evenly distributed in the fiber with the Suri, they may not take dye well, and you'll have these little clumps of white in them. Silk, of course, acts both ways, so it will take the dyes as well. Yeah, both of those plant fibers, both tencel and bamboo, have the same kind of luster and feel that Suri does. So they play very well together.
So, Laurel, you mentioned that you raise Huacayas as well as Suris. How do both of you have a background in raising fiber animals? Or how did you come to be Suri growers?
I was just absolutely mesmerized by the animal when I first saw them. And so, no, I haven't always raised fiber animals, but I was really blessed to have gone to a high school where there was weaving and such, and also very fortunate to have a mom that was a little bit ahead of her time in some ways because she didn't knit, but she spun fiber, and we'd go to buy sheep's fleeces and she would spin them up, and that's been my exposure to them.
Yeah, mine, well, let's just say my road to getting into alpacas was kind of funny. But what I would say, and not textile related, it's funny because my mom actually was a dress designer.
Oh.
Like she actually did that for a living. And my husband, he was initially a buyer for a large retail chain in apparel and then got into the manufacturing side. So I sort of have had the textile industry around me for all of my life, but was never particularly interested in it. And, I just was doing my own thing and ended up with the animals. And once I had them, though, that was sort of when I started to think, gosh, what do you do with this fiber that comes off of them? What's this all about?
By the way.
And so I actually, though, that was really kind of the start of my journey because I ended up, in order to learn, I ended up sort of attaching myself to some people. And I purchased my first animals in 2004. And really back then, there was definitely not much at all being done with Suri here in the U.S. They really were show animals and people were taking the fiber off and, just kind of pitching it, I think. But I ended up really finding, say, 2 or 3 people who really, I thought, understood the fiber well. And I found kind of a niche product out there, needlepoint yarn. And Peru had one product that they sold to all the needlepoint stores, and they were using Huacaya. And I just thought, you know what? I think Suri would be beautiful in needlepoint. And that kind of got me into it. And so I ended up working with a mini mill that was just phenomenal. She's not in business anymore, but she was phenomenal. And I learned a lot from her. And about that time, there were more tools, I guess, science-based tools that were coming out for breeders. And I really just became fascinated in addition to the business component, which I'd mentioned before, I also just became really fascinated with the science behind breeding for fiber and for the qualities of fiber and how that actually related then to the making of yarns or end products. And I just sort of went down the path, if you will, and really immersed myself in it and have been forever. 20 years later, I'm still just fascinated by it all.
Needlepoint absolutely makes sense when I think about something that would have a lot of luster and that would take dye beautifully. I bet that is spectacular.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, it's interesting because there's a lot of wool and silk threads that are out there for needlepoint. And I at the time, I just thought, well, gosh, Suri really kind of has that luster component to it,
right?
Without adding the silk. So, yeah.
So neither of you had a particular background in animal husbandry or raising fiber animals before. How has it been learning to be Suri breeders?
Well, that's been my favorite part because in my previous life, I was a physician assistant. And so I had this bent towards science and biology and things like that. And one of the fascinating things about alpacas is there really isn't a whole lot of, at the time, there wasn't a whole lot of science in back of taking care of them. There was still a lot of, pretty healthy learning curve on what to do and what not to do. So anyway, they're actually very incredibly easy to take care of. They're gentle on pastures, and they don't necessarily have to have a supplemental feed. They have to have a mineral mix. And they have a few peculiarities that make them intriguing as well. So there was a lot to attract the scientific part of my nature that made them fascinating and fun to take care of. And they're easy. They're, size-wise, I'm trying not, I don't mean to put down sheep, but one of the wonderful things about alpacas is that their center of gravity, when they're adults, is pretty much the same as our center of gravity. So when you're doing anything with them, whether it's to give them an injection or a medication or just handle them, put on their halter, whatever, they're where we are. When I have to do anything with any of my sheep, I'm already out of balance because I have to bend over. So that makes them a little bit more of a challenge to handle physically. And as smaller livestock, they're easier than taking care of a cow or a horse or some of the bigger livestock. So that's nice too.
Yeah, I would say overall, I've always been an animal person, had horses and dogs and cats, et cetera. So I guess the fun part for me, and one of the things I tell people who are thinking about owning the animals is even now, it is best to have an entrepreneurial spirit about you and a real eagerness and willingness to learn and to learn as we go, because there's still research being done about alpacas. There's still things that we are learning, not just the fiber, but from an animal husbandry standpoint. And you have to be willing to go with that. You have to be willing to say, okay, you know what? I think there's probably not an answer yet out there for this. And that's okay. We're sort of all learning as we go. And I like that. I like that about our community, the broader community, alpaca community. And I have just enjoyed that ongoing learning that I've done with them.
I'm glad Liz brought up community, because that is one thing about the Suri community is pretty doggone tight. In particular, the Suri Network has done a great deal to advance not just our little niche in the industry, but the industry as a whole. But we also are a pretty tight group that help one another out at shows, transporting animals. If somebody has, something happen where some sort of catastrophe, people quickly step in to assist one another. The difference being that instead of being the farmer down the road, where that kind of thing goes on in our own counties and hometowns, but this hometown is actually across the country.
Yeah.
But it's really neat to see how people will step in to assist one another and take care of each other and all work to advance the industry.
As a fiber artist, in order to try out Suri for myself, where would you recommend that I look?
Well,
I'm going to give this to Laurel because she's in charge of our website.
Oh,
the Suri Network website.
The Suri Network has a website, and we are constantly working on providing as much information, not only for our own membership, obviously, but also for people who might be interested in having the animals or people who might be interested in using the fiber. And so we're really kind of in a big push right now. We just renewed and rejuvenated the website a couple of years ago, but now we're really into a push to try and make it even more relevant. And Liz has been very involved in some new videos that our fiber committee has put together. And they bring goosebumps when I watch them. They are absolutely amazing. We have one on felting with Suri. We have one on spinning Suri, one with weaving Suri, one with knitting. They're just amazing with absolutely wonderful fiber artists featured within those videos. So I'd suggest at first you go ahead and visit the website. We have our members listed there. You might be able to find somebody close by that has product or raw fleeces available for you. And then, of course, festivals. There are a lot more alpaca breeders out there at the various fiber festivals across the country. Liz, you have anything to add to that?
I would say, I think on our website, I think we've got a tab for Find a Farm. And one of the things that we've actually done is asked our members, it's up obviously to each farm, but we've encouraged, I should say, our members to go in and they can select products, broad categories, but products that they have for sale. So they can check if they've got raw fiber for sale, if they have roving for sale, if they have yarn for sale. I don't know that we have one for end products, but those three categories for fiber artists is usually what they want to know. And then we also have a tab for the Suri Simply Stunning mark. I think that's under programs. And that then I think on the side, Laurel, we've got farms, right, that are members, and then that rotates through so that it can help people. But on the Find a Farm, you can break it down by state. So you could go into your own state and see if you see anything in there that, if there's a farm that's near you.
It really is special to make a connection. And in some cases, you can make it with a specific animal, but even to make a connection with a farm and say, oh, this is Fuzzy's friend or this is Fuzzy and I love this yarn and I have had a connection with where it comes from. There's something really special about that. And I think having a less common fiber makes that even more prized.
Yeah, and I think that really kind of folds into a broader trend, I think, within the textile market, which is about sustainability. And that word has, I think, a very broad and different definition, and different perhaps for various, from person to person. But one of the elements of sustainability a lot of times is kind of that, I guess we now call it farm to fashion, or really understanding where your raw materials come from, and getting involved at a much earlier stage than just going into a store and buying some yarn that, who knows where it came from kind of thing. Alpaca people are definitely, just again, broadly speaking, both Suri and Huacaya, I think have really kind of been on at the forefront of that for people and getting out to festivals, etc.
Where you can greet an alpaca right in the eye. They look you in the eye and you can say hello. The Suri Network has been involved in a lot of different education. I think I remember the Suri Network has been, involved with SOAR at various points in the past when I was first coming on, so 15 or 20 years ago. So if I'm not raising Suris, are there still benefits to being part of the Suri Network?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of times people do think about, I guess you have to own a Suri in order to be a member, and that's absolutely not the case. We encourage anybody who is interested in the fiber to join as well, whether you're an owner or not. We have a number of educational webinars that we put on. We have a symposium that generally has a fiber component to it in terms of education. We have a fleece show once a year that not only involves submitting fleeces, but also we have a whole segment for submitting yarns. If you're a spinner, you may want to submit your yarns into the competition. We have a fiber arts component to that. So if you have finished goods that use Suri, you can submit that and then get feedback from the judges, etc. And we've actually recently, and this, you don't necessarily have to be a member for this, but we have recently started something called Suri Sip and Share, which is a monthly event, a Zoom event, and you can dial in and we select a topic. So far we've talked about blending on one of them. Blending with Suri. We talked about knitting with Suri and kind of went through, and people can just share good experiences they've had. We hope there's a lot of those, but they can also ask questions if they've run into a challenge using the fiber in that particular medium. And then there are people there to kind of walk them through and give ideas and suggestions. People can hold up items that they've made to talk about. It's a very casual environment. We will have one on weaving, one on spinning, one on felting. So hopefully, I think it's kind of catching on. We've had some really good participation. But again, that's something that you don't need to be an animal owner to do that. And then you can be a licensee. And you don't have to be a member to be a licensee for the Suri Simply Stunning program, but let's just say it is more cost efficient to be a member. Because if you're a member, it's free. If you're not a member, you have to pay to be a licensee. But that's another reason to, if you're a fiber artist and you want to have that on your end products when you're using Suri. It's another reason to do that.
Sure.
And previous episodes of these Sip and Shares are on the website. If people want to, can't attend because they had some sort of conflict, they can always go back and take a look at them and still learn and enjoy them. They're all recorded.
I find myself hoping that occasionally there are photo bombs. Do any beasts ever come to your Sip and Share?
I think we haven't had anybody sitting out in the barn yet, but
maybe when it gets warm again.
There you go.
My daughter used to compete in obstacle classes as a kid. It's part of the alpaca shows. And I came home one day. One of the ways to make your alpaca bomb-proof is to just go and take it all over the place. And I came home, and here she is walking the alpaca up the steps from the basement, fortunately carpeted, and through the house. It's a little like a bit of a double take when, so you never know.
So that's a way to make sure that neither your alpaca nor your mom reacts to us.
Yeah. As long as they don't poop in the house, I'm okay with it. And their feet are clean.
Yeah. Well, Liz and Laurel, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed spending time with you and learning more about Suris and the Suri Network.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely delightful. Thank you.
Thanks to Liz and Laurel and the Suri Network for sponsoring this episode. Thank you for listening to the Long Thread Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate the show and leave us a comment on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks again.